honor their time and go ahead and get started. My name is Elena Corbett. I am the Director of Education Abroad at Amideast, and I am very excited to welcome you all today to a very special webinar that we're having in honor of Community College Month, the importance of community colleges in MENA studies. We are, of course, a lot of what we'll cover here today will have broad application, of course, far beyond studies in of the Middle East and North Africa and the Gulf, to other regions, to other professional disciplines and disciplines adjacent to those. But so I think there's broad appeal here in this conversation that we're going to have. But we are going to, because these are the places where Amideast works, we are really going to focus on the Middle East and North Africa and the Gulf, specifically positionality-wise, by extension as part of the Global South. And we're going to talk about Middle East and North Africa studies as imagined in their broadest possible interdisciplinary context. So I hope that sets us up for what we're going to try to do today. And I want to just take a couple of minutes to welcome our guests and introduce them to you. We are really honored to have both of them with us today. Jesse Marks is the Senior Advocate for the Middle East at Refugees International and a non-resident fellow at the Stimson Center's China in the Middle East program. From 2020 to 2022, he served as an advisor for Middle East policy in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy in both the Trump and Biden administrations. He has been a Boren Scholar, a Fulbright Fellow, a Scoville Fellow, and a Schwartzman Scholar, and his work is widely published. He holds a Master's in Global Affairs from Tsinghua University, Beijing, an MPhil in International Relations and Politics from the University of Cambridge, a BA in Middle East Studies and Arabic, and an Associate's in Archaeology from Florida Community College of Jacksonville. Nick Shafer is a transfer student from Foothill College. He graduated from the University of California, Berkeley with BA degrees in anthropology, Arabic language, and public policy. And he is currently at the University of Oxford, completing his master's in modern Middle Eastern studies as a Marshall Scholar. He is a foreign affairs professional with a regional specialization in the Middle East and North Africa, and is a previous recipient of a Boren and a Fulbright. He works on humanitarian policy and Middle Eastern affairs, and has previously worked at the USAID Middle East Bureau, the State Department, Advisory Committee on Public Diplomacy, and Smithsonian Institution. In his free time, I don't think either of our guests have that much free time. We're very grateful that they're both spending a little bit of it with us today. He leads global community college transfers and helps organizations build better programming and outreach to community college transfer and non-traditional student populations. Jesse and Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really honored of the gift of your time and your expertise and your dedication. All right, the way we're going to do this today, I have some questions that I'm going to put to our panelists. There's no script here, so hopefully if I miss some of the important points that they really want to cover, I have no doubt that they will jump in and make sure that those points are made. And then once we get to the end, if we have a little bit of time, we'll be happy to take some questions from the group here. So welcome, Jesse and Nick.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us here.
Oh,
and lovely to see you all.
So the first question that I have for both of you, and I mean, you can, whoever wants to answer first, or if you want to riff on each other, I mean, that's fine as well. We're trying to be a little bit informal here. It's kind of a two-part question. Why are community colleges and their student populations critical to international education? Specifically here, to MENA region studies and to any Global South context generally.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that. I was trying to do Middle Eastern studies and when I was in community college, and being an advocate now for community colleges in the international education space, I increasingly am convinced that community colleges are integral for a diversity of perspective in the foreign affairs sector and international education writ large. There's a big value now in DC and also around the world of how do you get your local to go global. You don't want the same people who are doing study abroad to represent the same institutions, the same type of class background, the same type of resource-rich environments. You want to bring people from all over to be able to access the world. And there's actually, our diplomacy is made stronger, our foreign affairs is made stronger, and international and intercultural exchange is made richer by bringing Americans from all backgrounds into that ecosystem. And that strengthens both Jesse and ours professional lives. And I know we feel very deeply. Jesse and I just saw each other this last week in DC, and one of the things I'm constantly reminded when hanging out with other community college graduates and people in Washington is we bring a really fresh perspective to the work that we do that also grounds it back to the communities we come from, whether that's in California or Florida or anywhere else. And that's a really deep value that you carry with you as you continue on these foreign affairs spaces and international education more broadly.
Yeah, I think Nick really hit all the top points there. I'll kind of do a quick anecdote. I think for me, my experience into all this field started from the local. I had little interactions. I initially wanted to study archaeology, so moved to Jordan in high school. But where I really found answers to the questions that I had raised about what I wanted, I initially wanted to study transportation and logistics and import and export cars. So I had no real interactions, particularly the Arab Spring rolled around in 2011. I was on the ground in Jordan for a summer, working with Iraqi refugees and Palestinians, and was really unable to interpret and understand what I saw on the ground. And then coming back to my home city in North Florida, it was a community college that actually had all the resources that I got to actually be able to understand this. One of my first friends I ever met was a Jordanian Palestinian guy who, his family was displaced in 1948. But was really providing me honestly real-time understandings of what was happening in Jordan on the ground. And I was kind of split between, do I want to keep doing and pursuing, importing, exporting cars? But it was no, actually, there's an unfolding humanitarian crisis in Syria, previous historic crises that have impacted Jordan. And it was really interesting in a diverse city like Jacksonville, Florida, where you have refugees from all over the Middle East, how quickly all of those ideas, communities, and perspectives converged at the local level in the community college. And really, it's hard. In a lot of places you can get those perspectives, but at the local level, where folks tend to not have that level of access, the community college is kind of an oasis of diversity in that sense, and it brings both refugees to resettled refugees to new access points for education, but also people who have never had any access points to those communities together. And I think on that end, that was what really fueled my interest in the Middle East in the long term, but also provided the resources to actually be able to understand what a career looked like in that specific field.
Yeah, just one last point before we go on to the next questions, off of Jesse's amazing anecdote and story, is that community colleges give the promise of being upwardly mobile in terms of educational attainment, in terms of being economically mobile for in your life in the American experience. It's why you go to community college. It's why you hold down jobs. It's why you go to community college, is a promise of a better future. And in the same way as you're upwardly mobile in the US context, community colleges, like Jesse said, is really where the global mobility comes into play. Community colleges is the highest percentage of first generation Americans enrolled at the associate's level. Many people, when they come to the US, when they try to learn English as an adult learner or as somebody else who's came into teen years, for example, you started at a community college. And so there's a really big value in really recognizing the value of community colleges and bridging that from the local out to the global. And that's part of where that value really comes from.
No, thank you both. I want to follow up on this point a little bit, and you both touched on it to an extent. Those resources that the importance of community colleges as resources. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how the uniqueness of those resources and leveraging them to get opportunities for community college students to have opportunities for international engagement, to have opportunities to study abroad, and how those really impacted your own journeys to get where you are.
I'll take a quick swing at it. I think we can spend both a lot of time and look at both the gaps and opportunities, because I think both are equally present here. I mean, in my personal experience, coming from North Florida, I had the added benefit of a sibling. Actually, all of my siblings did community college, all went on to state schools to study foreign languages, and then all went on to top 10 schools globally. So the resources at community college that gave me that, first and foremost, were professors. I think we tend to forget. I remember having a professor who taught at a top 10 university who retired in Northern Florida just because he could, and ended up teaching at community college, and took a significant number of hours out of his day and out of his weeks and out of his years that I was there, just to talk to me, to give me an understanding of what careers look like, to give me an idea of like what being in the field means, and how to pursue these opportunities. So I think first and foremost, your professors are everything, being able to develop those relationships. I think the second layer of that, which is quite helpful, they're the student body next to you. If you have a general idea that you have an interest in this world, whether that's international relations or politics or foreign affairs, or even just Middle East studies, or an interest in refugees, like those people tend to be present in a lot of community colleges and a lot of these networks, and small to large cities, I would say, where you have large community colleges. It might be a little bit more different when you get out to some rural parts of the world, but even in the Midwest, right, you have large refugee communities, you have large international communities that have moved westward, or in Nick's case, moved eastward from the California side. These people are there and they're very interested in talking. They're incredible communities. They're incredibly driven. Their parents in many cases, came over within the last few years as first generation. So I think that was a really big secondary resource. And I think the third one, where I think there's space to still develop, is right. A lot of community colleges in themselves do and increasingly have a better understanding of the fellowships that exist, both within the US funded programs, but as well as, kind of private donor based programs, and some that have their own endowed scholarships. I think the challenge, however, is that information is not always present, and the gap between community colleges and the types of fellowship offices that exist at larger schools that have larger budgets to support fellowship programming is quite large. So, for example, my community college growing up did not have those resources. I benefited from a sister who's very driven and had studied rapidly to understand what boron was, and kind of made it happen. So I kind of had that pre-knowledge, but a lot of folks that that were around me had no understanding or idea that the U.S. government actually offered such programs. So increasingly, I think that's changed, particularly now that there's a greater awareness of these in the recent years. I think the current administration has done a good job of really building out some of these diversity networks and being able to ensure that there is greater connectivity between the local and the international and the global, so that decision-making bodies within U.S. foreign policy, within international relations, are actually heavily informed by I would call it real America, but rural places, America as a whole, not just urban elites across both sides of the coast. And I think that's honestly one of the most inspiring things I've gotten to see. A first generation refugee to the US, a friend of mine and a mentor recently just won a pretty big fellowship to join and be on a pathway to working in policy. And for me, that was one of the most exciting things, because it really hits home of how community college, prepares students for this. And this was someone who, started community college, transferred to a 4-year, and then after that 4-year worked hard, but earned his way into a strong fellowship, and is on his way to becoming a policy leader in the US. It's really exciting to see.
That was a super comprehensive explanation. And so I barely have anything else to add to that, except in addition to Middle East, you mentioned, Elena, kind of linking this to the broader global South, is everywhere in the United States, there's pockets of communities that are super unique to that institution. I lived in St. Paul, Minneapolis for a little while, the Hmong community, the Eritrean community, wherever you are living in the United States, whether it's Middle East related or other communities, you actually do have really intense intercultural experiences right in your front door in almost any community, even rural parts of the US, where people have ended up moving. And so I'd really just encourage all of you to also think and kind of reconceptualize. Did this when I was in community college. My community college, like Jesse's, didn't have any Arabic program. There was no resources for fellowship advising. So I went to a local mosque. I went to a local Pakistani mosque that happened to have a Syrian imam who was there, who I took Quranic Arabic classes at a local masjid and local mosque, because that was what I had access to. And it was a way that I could continue my relationship with Arabic and with the Middle East and studying in the interim while I was in community college before I transferred to UC Berkeley and had institutional resources. And so I spent my time in community college learning what are scholarships, what do I want to do when I get to Berkeley, and I get letters of recommendation, I can get sponsorships, I can get resources from UC Berkeley in my 4-year to access that. I did my prep in community college, think, how do I hit the ground running? How do I know what to apply to? How do I know what classes I want to take? And how do you take advantage of that? And so really quickly, just to add on, I put some links here to some things here in the chat. There are some really, really good data sets and databases for you to explore, some opportunities, including, I actually don't think, I don't think Amideast, I think you were, I don't know exactly which programs you, I know like, other people work on some of these, IIE and Atlantic Council or American Councils, et cetera. But so the APSIA database of fellowship scholarships is an amazing resource for you to look through depending on where you are, of kind of different opportunities that scholarships that can meet you where you are in community college. ProFellow as well, Gilman, CLS, and Boren you can do while you're in community college. There's no sponsorship requirement from your nominating university, so you can apply to those funding to go to the Middle East while you're in community college. And then also just what we mentioned, there's some other resources that we've been launching as well, including the new fellowship called the Community College Global Affairs Fellowship, which we've launched this year to bring people to DC. We're hoping to continue running that in future years. So I'll just put those links there for you to open up in your tab so you can kind of explore on your own time. But these are some opportunities that are out there right now for you to help find more resources, mentorship while you're navigating your journey.
Thank you so much. And we also, before we got going, we were talking about some opportunities that are available even before you get to community college or beyond through opportunities such as the Kennedy Lugar Youth Exchange Scholarship, which does have a component where U.S. American students go abroad and enroll in high school for a year in a number of different countries. And also the Nisli Y, or the National Security Language Initiative for Youth, which are also, really important ways. I mean, if you can use those to build a foundation in so many things. And I think Jesse and Nick, as you will both attest, so much of this is just you get the first one, right? And then it just blows open the door to all of the others. And you can just keep going. Nick, one quick follow-up question for you. Jesse noted, I think all of the teachers in the virtual room kind of, felt a big warm thing in their hearts when you mentioned the professor who was such a great teaching mentor to you. Nick, was there anybody similar on your side, and can we give them a shout out?
Oh, 100%. I could shout out a dozen people, but no one was actually Middle East specific. There was no one who was kind of Middle East passion specific, but Scott Langford was very similarly. He was an English professor at Foothill College, and he'd gone to Stanford for his PhD, and he actually turned down a professorship at Stanford to go to Foothill College because he wanted to teach, because he was like, I want to teach where it matters. And he was like, I want to teach where it matters. I don't want to teach kind of the kids at Stanford. I don't want to teach that demographic of people. I want to teach where my brain and my teaching and my pedagogy makes a difference in students' lives, inspires them to look beyond and bigger. And so at Foothill College, he's mentored 30 years of students to go dream big and go on to great things. And so, yeah, huge shout out to him as well as everybody else in the Foothill team.
Great, thank you very much. Another question that you both touched on in a somewhat to this point, but I hope we could sort of follow this up and tease a little more out of this. You have both gotten involved in very policy-oriented academic and professional work. How have those journeys, again, you've already touched on this a little bit, how have your own journeys influenced how you problematize and approach your work? Because you're both working on very important things, very, like human sustainability on a habitable planet kind of things, right? In the realm of the Middle East and North Africa and beyond. So how do you think your background and your respective journeys, you know, what do you find in terms of unique perspectives that you bring to that?
I'm already unmuted, so I'll just go first, but I know Jesse has a lot of thoughts on this. I'll give him a second to collect his amazing, eloquent thoughts. So I think for me, actually, what I feel like is I've always felt insufficient, genuinely, is I think the moment when you realize the more you learn, there's this, I forget what it is, where it's like the more that you learn, the less confident you get of your knowledge, yet you are more competent. Like when you're just starting out, you're so much more arrogant of your own beliefs. It's like, oh, I know this. I've like studied Arabic for a year. I've been to the Middle East once, and like, oh man, I know so much about Jordan now, or I know so much about whatever. And you see this all the time with people, especially who are first-time exchange recipients or people who are first-time arrivals in a place where they, you learn a lot, but the more you learn, the more you realize you definitely do not know. And I think that's one of the things that I remember experiencing going through community college and transferring, and like the event horizon always felt like I was learning something new, and that constant pushing out of like the event horizon. Oh, I'm transferring to a 4-year. After the 4-year, there's a grad school that I didn't even realize was there. After the grad school, there's jobs I didn't even realize was there. And I think that humility of recognizing the naturalness and also the erroneous, like how you can make erroneous assumptions at every stage because of what you don't know, is really, really helpful when you're dealing with very complicated problems, because it encourages you, and for me at least has encouraged me, to find people who are a little bit more ahead of me in my journey, to talk to them, learn from them about what they've done, understand the pitfalls that they did, and understand how they've approached similar problem sets. Jesse's worked much more on the front line of policy making in the US than I have. But I think that that's kind of what I constantly try to remind myself, is that humility of recognizing and remembering like where I was a few years ago. What I learned, what I know now, to me feels like breathing second breath. Like all these scholarships and fellowships and talking here today is so natural to both Jesse and myself, but it wasn't 6 years ago. It wasn't 7 years ago. And I think that process of learning is really, really important. And relatedly, kind of going deep to where you come from. I think I grew up in Silicon Valley, so I was privileged enough to grow up in a very kind of network dense environment. I grew up about 30 minutes from Google and Apple. And so I grew up in a part of the country which had these networks and the culture of tech around me. And I think bringing those perspectives and going into where I grew up and the families that I was surrounded by and people that I knew from my community college, my time at Berkeley, to really then bring those fresh perspectives from outside of Washington, which has the habit of groupthink, the habit of going to the same universities, the habit of really kind of approaching this problem set the same way, and bringing that outside perspective. And some of my best friends here, like Jesse from Florida, other friends from Iowa, from Illinois, from other parts of the US, that don't think the same way as people in DC do. And I think that's really fresh to bring into the policy process when you're trying to approach problems with complexity.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Nick. So I guess for me, I come from a bit of a stranger background than most. I was homeschooled my whole life, my poor mother. I think I gave her more gray hair than she will want to admit. So for me, when I first walked into a community college, it was just a completely different world, right? It was the nice part about being a homeschooled student, amidst its challenges, was never easy, though, was that, you know, our school day was set. It was like 9 a.m. to like 4 or 5 p.m. And in that time, there was an expectation that I would be learning something. And if you run out of things to study, you begin to kind of push, like Nick was saying, new horizons, and kind of develop this like culture of learning and inquisitivity, I guess is the appropriate word there. And for me, that was around archaeology and these things. But when I got to community college, it was not only just the process of learning new things, new fields, new topics, but it was learning new perspectives and new contentions and new cultural dynamics, gray areas, moral questions, policy and political questions that, you know, I'd never been really as deeply exposed to. And I think that particularly for the Middle East was where I found a deep love for pursuing those threads that often are hard and contentious, historic and deeply rooted, but not just the issues themselves, but people who've been impacted by them. For me, that thread initially started with the Syrian conflict in 2011, and continues until now. And the more that I've pulled on that thread, my career is, to some extent, at every step and every job and every opportunity, every fellowship, has been oriented around the Syrian refugee crisis and the conflict. realistically going back till about 2011. And my time at FCCJ to FSU to Jordan for way too many trips. I joke that Jordan is kind of home in so many levels because I've spent probably 5 years or so there now. But it's really been articulated around this idea of helping support and protect vulnerable populations who have been, the most impacted victims of the Syrian war. And that has really shaped how I have approached my work on policy. It has shaped how, honestly, in a lot of ways, my views of the world have been, I guess, have evolved over time. In 2018, 2017, while I was on Fulbright, I did a bit of a weird thing where I decided to study Mandarin in Jordan. And it threw a lot of people off. But what it enabled me to do, again, with this question of Syria, was to bring in this entire other world, this new horizon of like understanding what China's been doing in the Middle East. And it's been 6 years since then. And I've had the chance to go on a fully funded master's to China to study Chinese Arab relations, to look at, China's role in human security and protection as it relates to the Middle East. And all those things have really converged in my career. And, where I'm at now, Refugees International really looks at all of these kind of threads that weave together. But realistically, the first tugging on that thread started at community college. And then at each step along the way, I think having the encouragement from professors and having I think there's also a level of courage, sometimes, I don't even know, backwards insecurity and imposter syndrome, but like people encouraging along the way to keep pulling on that thread to see where it goes. And fundamentally, it kind of brought me to where I'm at in my career today, and fundamentally where I'll continue to be, probably heading for the next 5-10 years of my life.
Really quickly, I just want to really reiterate that point that Jesse just made about creativity, because I think that one of the things that community college students have that more students that go to a traditional 4-year degree are kind of settled into that lifestyle don't have, is that desire to go and find that new horizon, is that desire to go, no, I want to go transfer. I want to go to this other place. I want to go to this other institution. In many ways, Jesse's own intellectual, the way he describes the intellectual journey of like adding in China. It's like, okay, I've done this Middle East thing for a few years now. Let's do Mandarin. Let's bring China into this. Let's go to grad school in the UK and bring the European angle into this. Let's understand how this is working beyond just this myopic kind of thing that I set on. I'm going through the similar process now with India and understanding how to integrate India and the Gulf and South Asia and Middle Eastern studies right now for myself. And I think it's one of these really natural things that come to people that come from community college backgrounds, is how do you kind of just keep on scaling up that curiosity, scaling up that push for something, that aspiration for something, which leads to really positive professional outcomes, whether it's in policy or whatever other area you choose to apply yourself in.
Thank you both. I wanted to, Jesse, I really appreciate you bringing that sort of, and so Nick, I guess my follow-up question is for you specifically, although you just touched on this. Jesse, I really appreciate that you brought out your, that sort of very personal feeling, you that pursuit, that being around for an unfolding refugee crisis, sort of what that kind of lit in you and how that has shaped you until now, and everything you did. And I just want to bring that out because I have I actually see him here. I have a colleague of mine from graduate school, and we were recently sort of communicating over Messenger about, I mean, I think the longer ago than that, the invasion and occupation of Iraq was a defining event in careers for many of us, for people who are certainly coming along, more than 20 years ago. So I really appreciate that you brought that out. And Nick, you sort of touched on this. Is there one, I know you did a Morocco thing in a gap year, but is there, it sounds like there's also something, what is that thing, that very personal, that very sort of like that ethical, moral thing that pulls on you now and is sort of driving those, those connections you're trying to make, with the Gulf and with India and all of these other things you just mentioned?
Yeah, I think it's kind of two things. I had less of a formative moment in the Middle East, as I think Jesse did. For me, when I was in high school, I had a lot of kind of, as many people do as you're coming of age, I had a lot of identity crises of like, my grandma is like one half Jewish. And so I was like, I was like, I'm Jewish, but not really. I wasn't raised Jewish. I'm like Jewish-ish. I'm American secular from the Bay Area, but like when I go into Israel, they call me Jewish. Like, that's weird. What is this thing about Palestine? And so I very much kind of framed a lot of my early engagement around the Middle East in a very kind of personal way of like scaling up my own relationship with Jewishness and kind of interrogating that relationship, both as an American traveling around the Middle East and like interrogating that legacy of the Iraq War. I was actually in Iraq just a few weeks ago. I actually flew into Baghdad on the 20th anniversary of the invasion of 2003 invasion on March 20th. And it's a lot of reflection of my own positionality. But I think I didn't have as much of a focus as Jesse did in terms of both physically Jordan and Syria as like the framing thing that I built my career around. For me, it was much more of a deep love and meaning that I got for myself out of intercultural interaction, of understanding both my own positionality in the American context, I was also homeschooled, so I think it's a through line. I'm also like really struggling with learning disabilities and feeling on the outside of American institutional education. And so for me, it was study abroad, language study, which is what I was good at. I was good at languages. I wasn't good at math. I wasn't good at other traditional school subjects. And so I doubled down on that. So I got a lot of personal meaning that was not really related to a problem set in the way that like Syria was not the thing that framed my engagement. I was a few years after Jesse as well. I started doing this in 2014, 2015. But I think like when thinking now about what has kind of emerged from this is really a commitment to making sure that the right people are in the room who are thinking about policy across the board. And what I mean by that is, on the one hand, that's what's motivated a lot of the community college advocacy, launching global community college transfers, trying to track and trace people like Jesse, who are amazing community college graduates that are out here to make sure that those diverse voices are heard within American foreign policy. I'm going to a subnational diplomacy conference, a city and state diplomacy conference tomorrow in Denver as a representative from California, of like, how do you bring in these diverse American perspectives into these ecosystems? And relatedly, kind of the India Gulf work is something just more broadly, we're living in a very complicated world now, that it's the presuppositions of what we think about what the US role in the Middle East is, what the US role in Europe is, what China's role in the Middle East is, what India's role is, this is a new complicated nexus that's flowing around. And to me, the most exciting part of international relations today is within the global South. It's elevating those voices. It's what is India thinking as the soon-to-be single largest country in the world by population, one of the fastest growing GDP economies in the world. What is China as like US and China around Taiwan? There's like so many fascinating questions that are out there, and understanding and diving into that complexity is something I feel very personally motivated by. But then also, how do you ensure that those perspectives from the global South get elevated up into an equal status with traditional power players like the United States and Europe that are sitting at the table? I think that's going to be the defining problem for our generation. And I think that it's so great that institutions like Amideast exist to really fight for and advocate for American engagement with regions that historically are so underrepresented within American study abroad, like the Middle East.
Thank you both. Again, something you've also both briefly touched on to this point, but you are both very active still in the community college community, sort of writ large, and you both have this commitment and this intentionality to your commitment. And so I wondered if you could both talk a little bit in more detail about some of those specific things that you're doing, some of those specific things that you're engaged in, and what results are you seeing? I think you're seeing some good ones. What are how are those outcomes? What is the future for some of these initiatives?
So I can leap in here first. So Jesse is part of an amazing network that we've been building over the last couple of years called Global Community College Transfers, which I put the link here into the chat. I'll re-put it here in case anybody wants to read up on what we've been doing. But so essentially, we had this realization about 3 years ago during the pandemic. I was on a board at the time. Jesse was just affiliated with Schwartzman. That there's so many of us. There's so many, like, you think like Jesse and I have crazy, weird stories, there's dozens more. There's hundreds more of people that are currently serving in the Foreign Service, have done study abroad in different parts of the world, that come from and identify with community college, transfer, non-traditional backgrounds. And so we've been building a network, a mentorship network that's based in DC. I know Jesse and some other people, Camille, some other people on our core team here, we're all thinking about how can we bring together for happy hours, how can we bring together for like networking events and kind of help people get mentorship. And this has culminated this last year with launching both Case with Elena, kind of like helping like in like the launch for that and kind of helping advise and how do we get community college students, how do we do the rubric for that. But then we also fundraise through the Gates Foundation for this fellowship here called the Community College Global Affairs Fellowships, CCGAF, which is a new flagship fellowship that we're hoping to continue building, hopefully one day, inshallah, if it all goes well, we'll be able to integrate it into the State Department ecosystem of critical language scholarships. We'll be able to kind of really socialize this into Washington as the flagship program to break community college students into the foreign affairs ecosystem. And it consists of 2 weeks of a paid summer enrichment program for students to come to DC. So fellows are actually paid. They receive $150 a day to come to Washington, DC for this paid fellowship. So it's balances the opportunity cost for working students who might have to sacrifice work hours to pay the rent to come to DC. So they come to DC for 2 weeks. They meet with people at the State Department all over, hopefully with Amideast, and we're sure we're going to be in touch about this too when the students are coming to DC. And then we also run a comprehensive mentorship program for these students where we then work with them one-on-one to help them apply to all the scholarships and fellowships that we've mentioned that are in Jesse and my own bios, including also to Amideast programs. So so we run that. We're hoping to continue to expand that. We've selected this cohort for this summer already. So we have 30 amazing students representing 22 community colleges, 13 states, and 80% Pell Grant recipients. They're going to be coming to DC this upcoming June. But the application will be open for future summers. So just keep track of that opportunity. The deadline will be open around November-ish of next year for next summer.
Yeah, I think Nick covered most of it. I mean, a lot of our, even in my own, like I said, I made an anecdotal note earlier to, one of my mentees through GCCT that recently won, very fresh, very recent, an exciting fellowship that I also was an alumni of. So it was very exciting to kind of just get to see that hard work. And I think it's been 2 years since I first mentored him over the summer, and it's exciting to see his hard work come to fruition. It's not easy, and I often sometimes think that people forget, for every successful application are however many rejections. I don't even want to ask Nick how many rejections between the two of us we've gotten for for applications we've applied, but it's like when you get to that one point, which Elena, I think you made the statement well, is like you just start with the first one and then the rest, it kind of snowballs. So it's really exciting. I think, but beyond that, there's a level of intentionality and the kind of work. So if I have interns or if I'm looking at engaging with folks, people reach out on LinkedIn to talk through fellowships. I think really making an adamant effort to just prioritize folks that are coming from that background, at least for me, and integrating them into the kinds of work that I do is important. Sometimes it's hard to invest a large amount of time, given, at least in my field, post-earthquake on Syria, I think, it tends to take a lot of oxygen, but there's, and as much as I can, and as much as just finding the time to talk to people, help them work through it. A lot of my work has been through FSU as well, and helping strengthening transfer opportunities. For a while, the university did not have, for example, a transfer pipeline into the Honors College at Florida State University, and that's changed since I left. My sister and I were both transfer students, and we couldn't really slide into the Honors College. And for me, that was particularly frustrating because I had a high GPA, but the only way that I could actually. But now there are a much larger number of resources and opportunities available, and my home institution has done an incredible job of strengthening pipelines from community college into transfer students, and then not just from the community college piece, but making sure that students that only have 2 years at a 4-year institution are able to utilize those well. And I spent a lot of time really working, at least with my home institution, on that front to kind of build those networks to ensure that a lot of those resources are designed well, but also that that there is mentorship at that level. I will admit that I'm very biased to Florida, to kind of the institutions that I've been to in that sense, but just because my sister also was a boring scholar and worked on a lot of these fellowship. So between the two of us, we pour a lot of time and to kind of helping build those pathways. Yeah, I mean, it's beyond that. I think Nick has kind of highlighted a lot of the other ones. I mean, the work that they've been doing at GCCT with Meridian is, honestly, there's nothing like it in the world. You know, I think other institutions are now coming online as well. Like you're seeing really great work out in Aspen and different places, but really just getting to see the work that I'm honored, you know, to get to be one of the mentors and to participate with GCCT, but seeing the work that, you know, they've actually been doing is just mind blowing. And that includes like helping build out pathways into the federal government that didn't exist before, helping mentor community college students and understanding that like, just because you went to community college in Kansas doesn't mean that you can't go in and be a diplomat. It doesn't mean you can't. And, you know, these summer programs that we kicked off and it was 2020, Nick, remind me, you know, we had hundreds of people live for these sessions where we would be, you know, helping people just understand what the landscape of opportunities look like from community college. There was a girl that I studied with on Born in 2015 who she was the only Born scholar to my knowledge that year who came from community college. Maybe one of three. She was certainly the only one in the Middle East. And like hearing her story was kind of wild to me because she had no fellowship office at her community college and had to physically find a professor and talk them into like sponsoring her application and had to explain to them what it was and just like the sheer amount of focus. And I always think back to that moment because I think about how much time that she had to put in to make that happen, and she made it happen. And like if that's the baseline, then you know our goal is to make that process easier, so that people don't have to put in 3, 4, 5 weeks just to understand what the program is, but really just have it all in one house. So I'll pause there.
What's next for both of you? After you're sort of doing what, not to put you on the spot and you don't have to answer, but what do you think the next chapters might be?
In relation to community college work or kind of career oriented?
Both.
Sure. Nick, you want to take the lead on this or you want me to kick off? Sure, I'll kick it off. I mean, for me, I'm committed fully to the Middle East kind of trajectory in my fields. Any position, anything I do will be to some extent related to the Middle East and to policy. You know, I worked in defense for a brief spell. COVID coming back, we got kicked out of China. So it was a really interesting shift and deviation to understand how kind of defense policy integrates with humanitarian policy in the Middle East, right? Because so much of U.S. foreign policy is defense heavy in the Middle East. But that this means that there's this powerful window regarding how U.S. foreign policy views humanitarian crises. Sorry, apologies. This is very DC, so honking outside. But there's this like really interesting view, frame in which the U.S. tends to view the Middle East. We look at Iraq, we look at Syria. It tends to be overwhelmingly on the security side of the war on terror. Move beyond that, and for me, it was helpful to kind of understand that dynamic. So moving forward, a lot of my work I think will be focusing on kind of this intersection between U.S. policy in the Middle East and reshaping this post-war on terror perspective of human security that is no longer focused on, oh, people could potentially become terrorists and we should stop them from becoming terrorists, but actually this idea that's like, no, people are endowed with a sense of humanity that, our investments in the way that we define security need to be oriented around, food, water, access, human rights, justice, these ideas. But then what do the implications of China entering into the region also mean for that, right? As you see, and how do you in all of these areas work best to provide long-term sustainable options to support vulnerable populations so that they can rebuild their lives in dignity, safety, and security?
So I'm currently finishing up grad school right now. And I think like many people, when you are at an educational leap off, when you're finishing a master's, you're finishing a bachelor's, you're finishing associates even, sometimes life doesn't look as clear. You know what you're passionate about, foreign affairs, you're interested in global studies, you're interested in these things, you have these expertises, but there's always lots of open doors. I think I'm kind of in one of those stages now of waiting for pieces to fall and life to kind of piece together. I'm waiting for I took my foreign service oral exam for the diplomatic corps on Friday. So I should be hearing back any minute, actually, like any hour tomorrow about whether I passed and I'm on the register for the foreign service. I've received a Fulbright grant in India, and I might go to India to do some research on the Indian foreign policy community vis-a-vis the Middle East. And yeah, we're continuing to work on GCCT projects and like building out this program with Meridian and other things as well, and other jobs in and around DC. So I think one core lesson I think I would just love to say is like, even though you have ideas of what you're passionate about, a lot of them also mold and change. And sometimes things work out. Oftentimes, like Jesse said, we've all faced rejection so many times of like, we've applied to things we don't get. You might look at our resumes post facto and be like, oh my God, this person was on like a golden ticket this entire time. And that's also a lot of nights where you're like, oh shoot, I didn't get that thing I applied to. I didn't do this. There's a lot of disappointments along the way. And I think a lot of it, especially when you're feeling that free floating space of you're applying to transfer, you're transferring, you're graduating, is being at grace with yourself too, of like knowing that you've done what you can and you've set pieces in motion. And those pieces, once they get set in motion, they will eventually fall in a place that will be really beneficial.
And if I could just throw in here, I'm also going to try to convince Nick to go do a PhD with me.
Never ending school, never finishing school. That's another good lesson. It's just keep in school for as long as you can, put off the rest of life.
Well, thank you both. And I mean, Nick, I think you just got a bunch of, everybody on this call is rooting for a good result on that, and that there's good news coming your way. And also, I mean, you've been so busy. I mean, you took this exam and you should just be putting your feet up and that sort of thing. And here you've been like going to conferences, and you're doing a webinar with us today. So we very much appreciate that. Does anyone else out there have any questions for our wonderful panelists who have been so not just generous with their time, but generous with, everything that's, going on in their heads and in their hearts. And this has really been wonderful. Thank you. We just appreciate so much how much you've shared with us. This has been really lovely. If anyone has any questions for Jesse or for Nick, I think they'd be happy to spend a few minutes answering them, but no pressure. You don't have to have questions. That's fine too.
One thing, like while we're waiting for questions, I would just love to mention is like that both Jesse and I, like the reason why both of us in our busy lives and like multifaceted things, I know Jesse's schedule, it's insane. And so I think the reason why we're willing to show up and kind of volunteer for panels like this, and thank you, Elena and Rachel, for really pulling this together and advocating, bringing Amideast to commit to this demographic, is because it's our stories. There's people that have your stories and identify with your stories, everybody else here on this call, that want to help you. And so please never be afraid. Like, I know it's really easy to look at someone who is a couple years older and be intimidated, or like, oh, I won't reach out to them. I won't text them. I won't shoot them a LinkedIn email or a message. I won't shoot them an email. Do that. Like, shoot the cold call, shoot the email off, feel confident. There's people like Jesse and myself and others, including people that come from backgrounds that you relate with. I also am very cognizant of the fact that both Jesse and I are like two white guys talking about the Middle East, right? And also, if you come from other backgrounds that you identify with, there are people out there who come from similar backgrounds that we would be happy to connect you with, that can speak to your own personal experience, that are our friends, our colleagues. So also, if you would like to talk with someone who's in Middle Eastern studies that comes from a background that's also that you identify with, let us know. I'll put my LinkedIn and email here in the chat. If anybody wants to get connected to anyone or mentors that do specific things, please just reach out and happy to help you.
Thank you so much. And I think, Nick, actually, that's how we met. I think you just emailed me out of the blue, and then it was like, oh, by the way, we're doing this community college thing, and then like he brought Jesse into it, and this is kind of how it, and then you start to make these connections and you start to know each other, and that's so important. Lori, I think you have a hand up. Let's see. Okay.
I do. Thanks, Elena. I don't know if you remember me. We met at CCID this year. I was presenting with Brian, and you were in our session. So it's super exciting to meet everybody in this group. Nick and Jesse, thank you. Just a little background quickly. My name's Lori Merlack, Dr. Lori Merlack. I serve as the Associate Dean on one of the campuses in Eastern Iowa at Kirkwood Community College. We have a very strong global learning department, and we're thrilled to be very active in a lot of different global initiatives. One that I've been involved with, and one of my colleagues, by the way, Sandra, is in this webinar as well. The reason we are here is because both of us have been heavily involved as faculty and as an administrator with Global Solutions, which is a Stevens Initiative project to help our community college students be more involved and have a better understanding of MENA countries. we've done some virtual stuff. We are both looking now to take it to the next step and potentially run a study abroad program to Jordan. I'm not really asking a question. I just want to lay some groundwork for why we're here. And since this is a group of community college folks and we have similar interest and passions, if you can't hear it in my voice, I get as excited as both you two do when we talk about these opportunities for our students. You know, a lot of our students at community college don't transfer. And so to that point, that's why these virtual experiences that we've been involved with have been really helpful, because a lot of our community college students won't study abroad. And while Sandra and I are here to talk, you know, we want to learn more about those opportunities too. Any type of opportunities we have to promote, you know, MENA countries and MENA culture with our students is just so essential. And especially for those not transferring and going out into the workplace and working with those who come from different parts of our world. So anyway, I'm going to definitely be in touch. So thank you for all that you've shared. And if anybody else is in this group that's interested in talking more about similar opportunities, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll put my email in the chat room as well.
Excellent, Lori. Just on that, I'll actually be in Jordan this summer. If you all are planning a trip or anything like that, happy to talk through institutions as well. Nick and I both spend a lot of time there with various study abroads and just generally programs and folks, whether that's at the embassy or whatever. So please let me know if we can help support kind of building that or connecting you to folks locally.
Yeah, and
We'll
I guess
do it. Much appreciate that.
yeah, Lori, just reiterate exactly that. So GCT, so the organization that I co-lead, that also the network that Jesse's a part of, we do a lot of just like informal advising also, and kind of helping like institutions and programs get launched that help with the case with Amideast and Elena's leadership, and then also kind of with this program with the Meridian International Center. And we love helping build programs. So honestly, like would happy, and of course, like Jesse said, he's Mr. Jordan. He knows Jordan probably better than almost any living human being who is not actually Jordanian, although he's Jordanian in spirit and sometimes often in voice. So yeah, happy to continue chatting. And that's an offer that also goes out to any other faculty or administrators on the call. If you're working in international programming and not just Middle East of any type, I'm advising another college is doing a program in Senegal right now. Kind of like just thinking about how do you connect all these things to also the US government onward funding. How do you think about kind of the synergy between career outcomes and jobs and internships between the study abroad and your campus, which is obviously something that students really care about is, okay, I go study abroad in Jordan. Now, how do I leverage that to get a Boran? Or how do I leverage that to get an internship at the State Department that can lead to a job, or et cetera, et cetera. And that kind of career argument for study abroad is something that we've been refining language about and making the case to students for a couple of years now. So happy to leverage those resources for your campuses. I think we had another question here from Jings about global CC transfers, about international relations. So I can just explain. So global CC transfers, so GCCT is a network of community college students that work in the international affairs sector or have done global education of some kind. So we basically have been trying to track and trace, I guess, like to use a sensitive COVID term, of the alumni who come from community college backgrounds that have done these things. And we run different programs. So we're hoping actually to really step up a lot of our public programming this next year, now that I'll be back in the US, hopefully not in grad school anymore, so have a little more mental bandwidth, and that we'll have more of our team in Washington. So we're hoping to really set up a lot more public events, public gatherings in DC, but also virtual events to help reach students across the US. So stay tuned and feel free to go on the website if you want to go find more information.
All right. Do we have any other questions?
So I do, I guess. I'm
for it.
Paul Edelman, professor at Sauk Valley Community College in Dixon, Illinois. So I run the study abroad there. It's a very small community college, maybe 1,200 students at most, so very rural community college. So past 5-6 years, I've been trying to develop the international context of it. It's basically just been me trying to do it. And I've been fortunate enough to, I guess, make some connections along the way. I've done a study abroad with through Northern Illinois University. They have a Southeast Asian center there. That's a national resource center. So we've taken students to Cambodia. I did a Pakistan exchange with Keork, and spent a year-long sabbatical in Palestine teaching at Najah University there. And that was a fantastic experience for me. I guess I have kind of a couple of questions. One is, can we kind of get involved in the projects that you're running as well? I noticed the mentor application on the transfer website where you can apply to be a mentor. So that's kind of one of my questions. The other one is, I'm just trying to get students more involved, I guess, and it's kind of hard from a community college perspective. So financing is a big issue for students. A lot of students work, so they can't take time off or have families themselves. I know virtual opportunities are beginning to grow. And if you have any, I guess, knowledge on background on virtual exchanges or programs, that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, I can hop in here quickly. So before I forget, there's this amazing program that the State Department runs called VSFS, the Virtual Student Federal Service, which is a flagship virtual internship program across all US government agencies. It's amazing. The application is due in July 10th. So we've mentored a lot of students to apply and have had a lot of our mentees go do this program. They do webinars about training people about how to train people to apply. So if you want to share on your campuses about that, that's going to come up this July. That's an amazing opportunity for a work experience.
Thank you.
So that's one thing that immediately. So yes, we are going to be putting out a call for our mentors for this upcoming cohort. We actually have a couple of people from the Midwest. I think we have 2 students from Michigan that are going to be participating in our fellowship. And we really wanted to have a lot of people who are from rural colleges as well. So I'm happy to share that link later with Elena. I'm sure actually we'd love to just like work with Amideast generally to find track and trace community college alums who've done Amideast programs. We're working with IIE as well to have them distribute to all Fulbright, Boren, CLS, Gilman alums, so we can actually get a data set of all the community college students who've ever done a US government program, which would be a big deal, and building that data set, and of course with Amideast as well for the Middle East. So we'll send more, there's gonna be some public links going around from different people over the next while that would be happy to incorporate that.
Thank you.
And one last contact. So Anna Quitter, she's currently on the board of the Marshall Scholarship, or the Alum Association of Marshall Scholars. She was formerly the head of federal relations for NIU, for Northern Illinois University. I mean, she's a huge advocate for study abroad in Illinois. And so if you're looking for funding and stuff, she'd be an amazing contact. I'm happy to put you in touch with her.
Thank you.
And Paul, I do want to highlight really quickly, we've mentioned a couple times the CASE program, community activism and social entrepreneurship. This is a new program that Amideast developed to kind of address 2 things. One, the fact that statistically speaking, fewer US students go to study in the Middle East and North Africa than anywhere else in the world for sort of like physical on-site study abroad, and also to address the sort of like having more opportunities for participants from community colleges to do that. So it is a community college specific program. We had a lot of help from people like Nick and Jesse and a lot of people in their network to build a good application process. It is competitive. It is meant to be doable. Right now, it is a fully funded week-long social justice oriented program that takes place in Tunisia. And uses the uprisings as a foundation for looking at uprisings in the region, but also uprisings and social justice movements here in the United States that students might be more familiar with, particularly Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Idle No More, these sorts of things. So the application for that, our first cohort will go in June. We have 14 community college students going to Tunisia for a week. We're so excited. And hopefully that's just the tip of the iceberg with many more to come. My colleague Miriam is clapping because she's been so instrumental in making this happen. And that's just the first iteration. Applications for 2024 will open in July, and we'll be sending out more information about that.
Okay.
But and that's hopefully, again, just the tip of the iceberg, and there'll be more programs of that sort in more places happening more frequently. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's a project.
I'm on the executive board of the International Consortium, or sorry, Illinois Consortium for International Studies and Programs. So we have about 30 community colleges across Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, Michigan. But most of our study abroads are sort of Eurocentric, so we're trying to expand out. So I might be in touch to try to build some of those into the Middle East.
Please do. We're really happy for the collaborations, and these are wonderful, collaborative, very intentional. I think we all feel very passionately about all of these things that come together that like make us do what we're trying to do here. And so we're happy for any of the collaborations and for everybody's time. Are there any final questions here, or Jesse or Nick, is there anything final words of wisdom or anything, not to put you on the spot at all, but final thoughts?
I guess like I'm not sure what the balance of students, administrators, faculty is here, but I think whether you're a student or whether you're faculty working with students, I think one of the things, as someone who's recently, recently, quote unquote, finished community college. I was last in community college 6 years ago, so it's not that recent anymore. But I think that one of the things that's so important is how do you really communicate to students, or if you are a student, how do you recognize that like people identify with your experience, even if it feels so unique. When Jesse and I met, and we were both like, oh my God, you're also a homeschooled kid that went to go do community college and then also went to Jordan and also like did all these things, we met randomly, like online before we met in person, and then we had mutual friends in Jordan. I think the thing is there's a lot of people that really want to help you. And so I just really want to reiterate the point that I made is like, there's a lot of people who either you can encourage your students to reach out to use the power of LinkedIn, use the power of social media, of social networking apps, use the power of emails, that there's students and people that want to help. If you get a student or you are a student that wants to work in diplomacy and go to the State Department, go do a search, or like encourage them to go do a search and just reach out to people. There's a lot of folks, you can do a search on LinkedIn for community college and State Department and find every single person who's listed as going to community college and at the State Department. And 7 out of 10 times, that person will want to speak to that community college student more than someone from their prestigious postgraduate degree, because that person from the community college, it's an identity that they carry with them moving forward. And so there's a whole resource and wealth of knowledge out there just waiting to be tapped into. So that's just my last piece of like advice, just any students, but also faculty who are advising students to really push your students for.
Yeah, I guess, and I'll kind of conclude for faculty here, at least, the most successful advocates that I've seen for community college transfer students, adding transfers here, are at faculty. So like, it's even, as you think about sending stuff out to students that you're working with and mentoring, also send it to the professors that are teaching them so that those professors can reiterate this point and get that second touch point in class. And just kind of, it's in terms of pedagogy, at least at the local level, I think students that I was with at community college didn't think that was an opportunity. Like I didn't even think that studying abroad was an opportunity. I paid for my first trip after working in fast food for 3 years to Jordan to do archaeology. Like it just wasn't something that people prioritized. And I think it takes a little bit of a knowledge shift and an education process, both for faculty and students, that these things exist and that people can compete for them and that they can actually win them. And that they're not only that, but there's also a top-down priority for community colleges to be a larger voice and kind of the education structure for international relations, for study abroad programs, for US funded, like government funded programs. So yeah, I never underestimate the power of educating faculty in as much as you're educating students, because you can reach out to 50 students and those students might leave in 2 years, but if you reach out to a single faculty that's going to have 50 students a year, you have a reiterative process in which you're not having to do fully re-educate a new class of students every year, but you have a team of people that you can work with to kind of continue to reiterate this to the students as they come in early, right? And as they think, from year 1 to year 2, how they can leverage these resources. And thank you all for
the last point that Jesse made about top down, State Department has released a 2022-2026 diversity and inclusion plan, which prioritizes community college outreach. They're putting new funding into pipelines. They're boosting up critical language investments. So this is also not just like a cultural thing, though, oh, we're talking more about community colleges. There's actually devoted resources that institutions are putting, the Gates Foundation into the Meridian Grant, CASE with the MENA initiative and the MENA fund at Amideast. There's actual money and actual resources that institutions are devoting to create new pipelines. And so just being really kind of having that confidence talking to students of like, yes, they actually do want you. They actually, not only that, they really, really do want you sincerely. Even if you don't get it, they do want you. And that's a really important thing to communicate to students throughout the process.
Thank you. Jesse and Nick, thank you so much. I can't thank you enough for your time, and to everybody who joined us today. Thank you for joining this discussion. It was a really, we were trying to think, what can we do that's very sort of authentic to, sort of our efforts and what we want to do in the future and what we're trying to do. What's an authentic thing that we could do to commemorate Community College Month? And we couldn't have done it without all of you. Special thanks again to Jesse and Nick for sharing your time and all of these resources and helping us sort of further build this network. And with that, I think we will go ahead and wrap up. Again, everybody, I hope if you're in the academic world, I hope your spring term is coming to a kind conclusion. Jesse, thank you so much and good luck with everything. And Nick, we're pulling for you on this imminent news. So everybody, with gratitude, thank you so much for coming. It was lovely to have you all here. And keep watching your emails for future things from us. And we look forward to being in touch. Thank you all, and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
everyone.